Growing edibles, be they vegetables, fruit, berries, or herbs, is traditionally done in a vegetable garden or allotment, as you saw in my last video. But if you have a small space, it could be a balcony or a patio or even a tiny garden, sometimes growing in pots and containers is going to be your best bet. I'm Tanya from Lovely Greens, and in this video, I'm going to give you a quick start guide to growing your own edibles in pots and containers. This is the home garden, and we've been here 2 years. We bought the house, I guess almost 2 years ago. This bed here is covered in weed suppressant material, so this is going to be a new bed this summer. And then we built raised beds last year, and there's not a whole lot going on in them at the moment, aside from some greens and also the purple sprouting broccoli, which is one of my favorite veg. It comes in very handy this time of the year, and we've been eating loads of it. I also have a greenhouse, which you'll see here. And inside is where I grow tomatoes because my climate isn't great for growing them outdoors. And I also propagate a lot of seeds inside as well. And you can see that I've actually got the tomatoes right there. So I've got 3 varieties that I'm growing this year so far. And I'm also starting off various seedlings, whether they be in containers like these 2 or in small pots. And most of these will either go out to the allotment garden or be planted up in the raised beds or containers here at home. I feel very fortunate to have this extra space behind the house to garden in addition to the allotment. But I realize that a lot of people are not going to have that luxury. And maybe what you have is just a small square of a patio like I have here. So I'm just going to show you what I've started putting in. First of all, I built this L-shaped bed on my own last year, and I have it filled with a combination of topsoil and compost. And there are various herbs in there right now, including sage and rosemary. I have 3 different types of perennial onion. So these little tiny ones here, those are just the starts of Welsh onions. I've got perennial onions right there, and then chives down at the end. There's also a few dwarf fruit trees in here. So there's a dwarf apple, a dwarf pear, and this here is a Cape gooseberry. As far as containers are concerned, I have the Gardena Nature Up installed there on the fence. It's a nice sunny place. And there's a few different pots sprinkled around. So I've got a pot of lavender, I've got some thyme, a dwarf raspberry, and I've sown some seeds into these 2 pots. And then over here, I have some mint in a pot and also a strawberry pot that I will need to replant up this year. So this is probably going to be a task for the next couple of weeks. I have quite a few different pots in front of me here. But first of all, what types of edibles can you grow in them? And it's practically anything, but it's going to be dependent on the plant and on the size of the pot. The bigger you can get, the better. These are all relatively small to medium-sized planters, but you can get decent-sized ones that have a lot more depth in them. They're more like mini raised beds, to be honest, like the birdie type of planters. And those are going to be even better because the more you can put inside them, the more moisture they'll be able to retain and the more nutrients that will stay there inside that container. Every single one of these pots, when you fill it up, is going to be this little tiny ecosystem that you're going to have to carefully monitor and control all the moisture levels and the nutrients and the pests and all of that. And when it comes to containers, bigger is actually better. So with all of these pots in front of me, I'm going to say that they'll all be decent enough to grow things that are shallow rooted. So things like lettuce and greens and even some root veg. And those types of veg, they only really need about 6 inches of soil. And with lettuces, even less, 4 to 6 inches. And this pot is actually what I have grown tomatoes in, and also aubergine, so eggplants in. So this is plenty big enough. Each of these pots has a different type of material, and there's actually even more than I have here. But I want to introduce you to some of them just so that you understand the difference. So first of all, terracotta. I do love growing in terracotta pots, but they can be challenging for people because the material is porous. That means that terracotta can wick water and air right through that material. So that means that they can dry out very quickly. And also when you're potting these up, you really need to soak these in water first. Otherwise, when you plant your plants inside and water it, the terracotta will just suck that water straight out of the compost and it'll be super dry. A step up from terracotta would be the glazed terracotta. And so this is the same kind of material as the terracotta pots, but it has a glazing on it. And so that means that moisture is going to stay inside the pot, at least a lot more than if it wasn't glazed. So these are great for vegetables and anything really, and they'll be a little bit more expensive, but they come in pretty colors, all perfectly safe to use for growing edibles. Plastic is probably the most versatile container that you can get. They're cheap, they can last a long time. Choose ones that have thicker plastic rather than the flimsier, thinner ones, and you can have them for years and decades. These retain water really well. They have good drainage at the bottom, which is important for all containers. And you can get them in all different kinds of shapes. So pot size like this, or molded into vertical gardens like this, or in fact I have a green stalk planter as well, which is also another vertical gardening system. And plastic is controversial because of all the single-use plastic debate, but when you're buying plastic items that are going to last a long time, it makes sense. Another type of container that is new to me, and I'm just using it, or starting to use it this year, are these root pouches. And these are fabric containers, and they're lightweight. You can move them around. They've got handles on them, and they have a really great function in that they root train. So that means that any plants that are growing inside, their roots will come up to the edge and they'll feel that air there and they'll stop growing. And so the root ball stays really healthy inside. And these are great also because they're made out of recycled water bottles. And so it's using a recycled material and putting it to good use. A lot of recycled materials can make good planters as well. And over here, I'm using the bags that compost and soil has come in to grow some potatoes. And I've just planted them. And the idea here is that you fill it up just a little bit. You put 1 or 2 potatoes inside, just cover it. And then when green leaves start growing out of it, you fill it with even more compost. Just cover those green leaves and you can unroll the bag and roll it back up and fill it gradually over the season. And then when the potatoes are ready, you empty it and there'll be loads and loads of new potatoes in this case, and main crops in those. You can also find wooden planters, and whether they are the half barrow type planters or pallet planters like the strawberry pallet planter that I have a video for, these can also make really good places to grow edibles. When you are working with pallets, so make sure that the wood is heat treated and not chemically treated, and I go through that many times in all of my pallet videos. And as an aside on terracotta, many of you will have seen my video on making DIY oyas, and that really explains how porous terracotta can be, because when you fill these with water and sink them into the ground, that water will actually be pulled out into the soil and into the roots of plants. So that just demonstrates exactly how water can transport right through that surface. Let's say that you've sorted yourself out some containers and you've got some plastic pots like this. How do you start growing things in them? What do you put inside, and how do you get those plants started? It's going to be different based on the type of plant you're growing. So if you are planning on growing tomatoes in this, what you put inside is going to be different from what you're going to be putting in if you're going to put a blueberry bush into this. This is actually a little bit too small, I would say, for a blueberry bush, but the compost and what you put inside will be different based on plant, and that's the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't have to be complex though, and I would say the easiest thing to do is to look for really good compost that's made specifically for edibles. And my favorite is this, and this is Dalefoot compost, and it's for vegetables and salads. It's organic, it's peat-free, soil association approved, and all you need to do with this is line the bottom of a pot with some kitchen roll or newspaper. This is totally optional, by the way. This is just to keep the compost from sifting out while you're moving the pot around and all of that. And you just fill it up to within an inch. And that's all I'm going to do here. When you first put the compost in, it will be really loose, and over time it will compact, so you can fill it up even more than this. Now this stuff is really rich, and you can get a good few crops out of it before you need to change it. And you can plant directly into it with seedlings, you can sprinkle seeds over the top, and this will give pretty much all the nutrients that the plant will need in its life. And then at the end of the season, you can empty these out into garden beds to use as mulch afterwards. And then you would refill the next year and grow again. So this is dead simple. We need to have a little conversation about garden soil and topsoil. Please don't be tempted to go fill one of these containers with soil from your garden and then try to grow in it, because you will likely fail. So soil like that, any kind of topsoil, when you put it in a container like this on its own, it will compact, it will dry out, there's not enough nutrients in it to keep plants alive. When you take it out of the ground, it doesn't get recharged by the nutrients and the organisms and the rain that's in that soil. It's kind of like taking water and putting it into a fish bowl, so like a goldfish bowl, and then just expecting it to always be pristine. It's not like that. So the best thing to do is just focus on using good quality compost in these containers. And if you are planting up something like a herb or a dwarf fruit tree, something that's going to be in the pot for a long time, get something that's loam based, and you can get John Innes No. 3 in bags ready to go. And if you want to avoid peat, you can mix up your own peat substitutes for John Innes No. 3. And there are quite a few good books and guides out there that will teach you more about creating your own potting compost or potting mixtures. And I'll leave some links down in the video information for some books that I recommend, including Garden Alchemy, which was just out this year, and that has loads of fantastic ideas for creating your own fertilizers and compost and potting mixtures and all of that. And also Container Gardening Complete, which is another great book. And there's a couple more as well that I think you'll find really useful. The last bag of stuff behind me that I want to introduce you to is Farmyard Manure, and this stuff is incredible. So if you're going to get anything other than good quality compost, I would recommend that you get this stuff. And it doesn't smell like animal poo, but yes, it is made out of horse and cow poo. And it's been rotted down, and it is this wet, nutrient-dense mixture that's great as a mulch on tops of the containers or worked into the compost as well. And if you're growing heavy feeding plants like tomatoes and anything that fruits basically, this stuff is going to load up the soil with nutrients. They'll absolutely love it. This last row here is a mix of lettuces called Morton's Secret Mix from the Real Seed catalog. And this is the main way that I grow lettuces. So I'll grow them in modules first and then plant them out either into my containers or into the beds. But I grow greens in another way as well. So I've got a couple of containers here. So the one at the bottom, this is just a wooden box, quite shallow, And it's just filled with that really good compost from Dalefoot. And I've sprinkled seeds in, and I think this is the Morton's mix as well. Let me just have a look at the label. Yeah, so this is the same mix, and I put this in on the 7th of March. And so you can see what they look like now. So it can take a while for greens to sprout and grow this time of the year. They will speed up as it starts getting warmer, but before you know it, these will actually be baby lettuces that I can come in and harvest as cut and come again. And I might even pull some of them out, some of the individual lettuces out to grow on as well. So these are really easy to grow greens in. And these root pouches, I've got a few of them now, they seem to be just as easy, and they'll be really versatile in actually moving around the garden, taking down to the patio. And inside here, I have a mixed spicy salad mix, and they were sown on that same day. And you can see that they're quite a bit larger than the ones down below. If you do have the time, the space, and the resources, I highly recommend building deep planters like this or raised beds. But if you don't, you can garden successfully in containers. You do need to keep on top of the watering. That's going to be one of the most important things, not letting them dry out and not letting them get too wet. You need to make sure that the plants get enough sunlight. You also need to make sure that you don't plant too early. So don't put plants into containers outside unless you're past your last frost date, especially with young tender plants that you might be growing inside. I hope that you've learned some things about growing edibles in containers, the very basics at least. But if you have any questions or comments, leave them as a comment down below and I'll get back to you. I'll be back again next week with another idea for growing your own edibles and creating your own victory garden, whether it's here on your patio or in your back garden. Bye for now.